Okay, so we're looking at the homework answers, reasoning and conditionals, and we're going to go over 3C. Okay, 3C says, if two angles have a measure of 90, then the angles are congruent. Sometimes if you're having trouble with these, you can draw yourself a picture. But in the original statement, we have two angles. They both measure 90, and the conclusion is they're congruent. That is true. Congruent means the angles have the same measure. 90 equals 90, therefore it's a true statement. Okay, now let's do the converse. Converse, reverse. If two angles are congruent, that's the conclusion. If conclusion, then hypothesis. If they're congruent, then they have a measure 90. Now remember, if you can think of a counterexample, I'm going to draw two angles that are congruent. Oops, 110. Those both have a measure of 110. Let's pretend they are congruent, but they don't measure 90. If I can find even one time that it's false, the truth value is false. I found a counterexample, therefore it's false. Here's when it gets weird, when we put all these nots in it. Ready? Inverse means not. You not the hypothesis and you not the conclusion. You negate it. Okay. If two angles do not have a measure of 90, okay, so let's stop right there. They can have any measure they want. They don't measure 90, so they can measure anything else in the world. Then the angles are not congruent. Okay, let's see if I can prove it wrong. That's what you're trying to do. Try to find the flaw. Try to prove it wrong. So, I'm going to draw two angles, and I'm going to make sure they do not measure 90. All right, this one measures 30. This one measures 30. If they don't measure 90, then they're not congruent. Well, I just drew two that are congruent. I just proved it wrong. If you can prove it wrong, which I just drew a picture, I proved it wrong. If you can prove it wrong, the truth value is false. 30 degrees and 30 degrees. Those don't measure 90. Check. But they are congruent. I made the conclusion false. Okay, last one, the one you really asked about. This one's where it gets really tricky. Okay, contrapositive. Reverse and negate. Reverse and negate. If two angles are not congruent, stop right there. That is established. That has to be true. We have a situation, we have two angles, and they are not congruent. Let's draw a picture. Draw two angles, and make sure that they are not congruent. Okay. That has to be true. That is established. Now let's see if the conclusion is true or false. If two angles are not congruent, then they do not have a measure of 90. Cool, my picture works. They're not congruent and they don't measure 90. Now, you can't just find one picture that works. You need to try your hardest to prove that wrong. But the thing is, if they were both 90, then they would be congruent. I can't find a time where two angles don't match, but they both measure 90. I simply can't draw it. I can't think of a time. There is no counterexample. And so it is a true statement because a counterexample doesn't exist. They have to be not congruent. If they're not congruent, there's no way that they could measure 90. So that's true. The hypothesis follows with the conclusion nicely.